The text message arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning, interrupting what had already become a full and demanding day. I was sitting at my desk, reviewing growth plans for a handful of small businesses that my investment company had taken on as clients. Papers were spread across the table, numbers were running through my head, and then my phone lit up with a name I recognized immediately. It was my sister, Olivia. The message was short and carried the tone she always used with me, the tone of someone issuing a command rather than reaching out to a person she loved. She told me the family was gathering this Friday at 2 in the afternoon for the reading of our grandmother's will. No greeting, no warmth, no acknowledgement of the loss we were both supposed to be sharing. She added a few more lines. She told me not to cause a scene and mentioned that her husband Marcus would be attending. There was nothing resembling a kind word. No asking how I was holding up, no expression of sadness about Grandma Helen being gone. It was simply information delivered like a memo. Marcus is her husband, Marcus Wellington III, a government judge whose title Olivia has found a way to mention in nearly every conversation since they married 3 years ago. I typed back that I would be there, and she responded immediately, telling me to dress appropriately because this was a legal proceeding. I set the phone down and stared out the window for a long moment. I am 32 years old. I own and operate a company that manages $47 million in assets for our clients, and I hold board positions at 4 major corporations. By any reasonable measure, I have built something real. But within my family, none of that has ever seemed to register. To them, I have always been little Emma, the one who went the wrong direction, who chose economics over law, who refused to follow the path they had laid out so carefully. They wanted me in law school, in courtrooms, moving through the kind of high society circles they admired. What I wanted was to build something of my own, from nothing, with my own hands and my own mind. That choice cost me something with them that I spent years trying to understand and eventually just accepted. Grandma Helen had passed away 2 weeks before that Tuesday morning. She was 91 years old and had lived a life that deserved to be celebrated properly. On her final day, I was the one sitting beside her in the quiet of her room, holding her hand and staying with her until the very end. My sister could not be there because she was attending a fundraising gala for judicial organizations. My parents were somewhere in the Mediterranean on a cruise and had decided not to cut their trip short even after we learned Grandma's time was running out. In that small room, with the afternoon light coming through thin curtains, Grandma looked at me and whispered the last words she would ever say to me. She told me I had always been the smart one and made me promise I would never let them make me forget that. I held myself together then, and I made a quiet decision that I would hold myself together on Friday too, no matter what the room threw at me. The difficulties with my family stretch back a long time. The moment things really shifted was when I was 16 and announced that I would not be applying to Yale, where every member of my family had gone before me. I had found a state university with an economics program that was genuinely exceptional, and I had made up my mind. My father told me I was discarding our family's legacy. My mother called me selfish. Olivia, already 4 years older and dating a law student she would eventually marry, looked at me with an expression that managed to convey both pity and contempt at the same time. I worked harder in college than I had ever worked in my life. I graduated at the top of my class with dual degrees in economics and mathematics, and I received a special academic medal for distinguished achievement. My family attended the graduation ceremony, but they left before the medal was presented. They had a charity dinner to attend, they told me. I stood at the front of that auditorium accepting recognition from people who understood what I had accomplished, while my family was already in a car on the way to something they considered more important. At 24, I took $200,000 I had saved through years of grueling work at a bank and used it to start Anderson Capital Management. The office was a small shared space in Seattle, nothing impressive to look at. By 27, we were managing $15 million. By 30, $40 million. Now, at 32, we handle $47 million, focused on identifying struggling companies, acquiring them, and rebuilding them into something that works. I built every piece of it myself, and I never once told my family how far it had come. The honest reason is that they never asked. Holiday dinners revolved entirely around Olivia and Marcus, around his cases and their island vacations, and the lake house they had purchased. My parents beamed at them. Then they would turn to me with their apologetic faces, and my father would ask if I was still doing that finance thing, and my mother would ask why I hadn't found someone to marry yet. Olivia would mention casually that I was still renting. I had purchased a penthouse apartment for close to $2 million, but I never told them that either. I already knew they weren't truly listening. Grandma Helen was the only exception in my family, the only one who had always been genuinely different. In the 1,960 seconds, she had built her own real estate business during a time when banks would not give a woman a loan without a man's signature on it. She pushed through every barrier, accumulated a portfolio of properties worth over $80 million, and never once used dinner conversation to brag about it. She would sit quietly, watch the room, and sometimes catch my eye and wink at me like we shared a secret. For the 5 years before she died, we had lunch together every single week. She asked me real questions about my work, about the companies I was turning around, about the strategies I was using. She was the only person in my family who knew exactly how successful I had become. She told me once that being underestimated by the people around you was the most powerful advantage a person could have. I have thought about that almost every day since losing her. Friday arrived with the kind of gray, heavy rain that November brings to Seattle reliably. I dressed with intention, a dark blue suit, simple earrings, hair pulled back cleanly. I looked like what I was, a professional woman who knows exactly what she is doing, though I already knew my family would find some way to read it as trying too hard. The law office was in a downtown tower with a view of the water from the upper floors. I had actually been there before, meeting with Grandma's legal team over the years as she worked through her plans. I arrived 15 minutes early. My parents were already seated, scrolling through their phones, wearing expensive clothes, and barely acknowledging me when I walked in. My mother noted that I was early. My father made a sound. At exactly 2 o'clock, Olivia and Marcus entered, making a small production of arriving because Marcus had been on an important legal call. Olivia looked like she was attending a gala. The diamond on her finger caught the light from every direction. Marcus carried himself with the settled authority of someone who is accustomed to rooms deferring to him. We were led into a large conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows. Jonathan Whitmore, a deeply respected attorney who had known Grandma for 4 decades, sat at the head of the table. Beside him was Patricia Chin, who had handled much of Grandma's estate planning. And then I noticed someone else in the room who surprised me, David Morrison, my own business attorney. Olivia glanced at him with suspicion but said nothing. Jonathan opened with a few words about Grandma Helen, and I sat quietly thinking about her teaching me chess as a small girl, always reminding me to think several moves ahead and never reveal your strategy to your opponent. He then stated that the estate had been valued at approximately $83 million, the majority of it held in real estate and land. I watched my parents lean almost imperceptibly forward. Olivia's fingers tightened around Marcus's hand. Jonathan explained that Grandma had established a trust and had appointed a single person to oversee and control the entire structure. My father stated plainly that it would naturally be him, the oldest child. Jonathan shook his head, and Patricia spoke clearly into the silence. The trustee and controlling party was Emma. Me. The room went absolutely still for a moment, and then it didn't. My parents began talking loudly at the same time. Olivia told Marcus this had to be a legal error. Marcus stood up and used the voice he probably uses when he wants a courtroom to fall into order. He said it made no sense to place an estate of this size in the hands of someone in a low-level financial job. That was when David stood up and explained, calmly and with complete precision, exactly who I was. He told them I was the founder and sole owner of Anderson Capital Management. He told them about the $47 million under our management. He listed my board positions. He described the profile of the work I had been doing for nearly a decade. My mother looked at me as though she was seeing a stranger sitting in her daughter's chair. She said quietly that she had thought I worked for a finance company. I told her I did. I also started it, and I own it. Olivia's face flushed deeply. But Marcus, I noticed, had gone very still. He had clearly just connected my name to a well-known acquisition in the technology sector that had attracted serious attention in business circles. He sat back slowly and began reassessing everything he thought he understood about his wife's unremarkable younger sister. Patricia laid out the structure of the distributions. My parents would each receive $150,000 annually. Olivia would receive $100,000 per year. My mother was visibly stunned, clearly having expected something far larger from a fortune of this scale. Jonathan explained that these were generous provisions and that the estate's design was oriented toward growth and charitable giving. My father demanded to know who held the properties. Patricia told him the trust held everything and I controlled the trust. Olivia rose from her chair and said she intended to challenge this in court. She told me I had taken something that wasn't mine and stolen from the family. I kept my voice level and told her that I had taken nothing. Grandma had made these choices herself, had made them carefully over many years, had discussed them with me and with her legal team, and with two physicians who certified that she was entirely sound in mind and judgment. My mother tried to suggest that perhaps Grandma had not been thinking clearly in her final years, and Patricia stopped that line of reasoning immediately with the documentation of both medical assessments. Jonathan then passed me a letter in Grandma's handwriting, my name written on the envelope in the careful script I had known my whole life. She had written that she knew full well what the reaction in that room would be, and she thought it was necessary. She was tired of watching people who had never built a thing treat someone who had built everything like she was invisible. She told me I had the integrity and the skill to honor what she had spent her life creating. She wanted them finally to see me clearly. Then she told me to look at page 47 of the legal documents. When I turned to it, I had to take a slow breath to steady myself. Over the course of the past 5 years, Grandma had been transferring portions of her real estate holdings to me directly as gifts, structured in a specific legal manner. I already personally owned 40% of the entire portfolio. The trust controlled the remaining 60%, and I controlled the trust. The arrangement was complete, legally airtight, and had been years in the making. My father said it felt like a betrayal. I told him honestly that Grandma had built her life from nothing without help from anyone in this room, and she had spent years supporting all of them generously, paying for weddings and houses and travel, and they had treated her like an obligation. I asked them in the silence of that room when any of them had last visited her without needing something. No one answered. I told them I had been at every doctor's appointment, every difficult night, every quiet moment when she needed someone there. I was holding her hand while they were at sea. My mother was crying by then, genuinely. My father could not look at me directly. Olivia made one final attempt to suggest I had manipulated an elderly woman, and Marcus, of all people, cut her off. He told her the documents were solid and there was no legal path forward. He looked at me differently now, and I understood that he was recalibrating in real time. When the family left, I stayed with the lawyers and we went through the financial picture in full. The properties generated roughly $6 million annually. After the family distributions, nearly $5 million remained. Grandma had designated a minimum of 15% to charitable causes, organizations supporting women in business, college access for young people with limited means, and cancer research. That came to almost $1 million in giving every year. It was exactly the kind of legacy she deserved to have. Patricia told me one more thing before I left. Grandma had a house in Magnolia, an old property the family believed she had sold years ago. She had kept it quietly and spent the past year having it restored. She left it to me personally. I went the following morning. It sat on a cliff above the water, a beautiful old structure full of light and quiet and the feeling of something carefully preserved. There was a letter waiting inside. Grandma told me the house was mine to fill with people who actually loved me. She told me to try to forgive the others, not because they had been right, but because carrying that weight would only slow me down. She said forgiveness was something you did for yourself, not for the people who had hurt you. The months that followed brought gradual, uneven change. My mother came to my office one afternoon and apologized in a way that felt real. She admitted they had failed to see what I had built and who I had become, and she asked if there was still time to be a proper family. I told her I hoped so, and that it would take patience and genuine effort from everyone. Thanksgiving that year was different. I brought people from my office, friends who had become something like chosen family over the years, and the dynamic around the table shifted in ways I hadn't entirely expected. Olivia sent a text that said simply that she was sorry for how she had treated me. I read it several times before I responded. A year after that Friday in the law office, we held a grant ceremony for the charitable fund. Nearly $1 million went out to individuals and organizations doing meaningful work. My parents and my sister were there, and for the first time I could remember, the pride on their faces when they looked at me was connected to something true. They had stopped calling me Little Emma. They just called me Emma. They asked about my work and then actually listened to what I said. I live in the Magnolia house now. On some mornings, with the water visible from the window and the quiet of the cliff all around me, I think about everything Grandma built and everything she believed I could carry forward. I bring her flowers at the cemetery and tell her about the work. the companies finding their footing again, the scholarships being awarded, the researchers being funded. I thank her every time. She taught me that the real measure of what you have accomplished is not whether you proved someone else wrong. It is whether you proved to yourself that you were capable of something great. That is the lesson I carry with me, and I do not intend to forget it.